Guys, we got to talk about one thing about crypto. For all the doubters that think crypto won't be successful, the Fed and the US government has essentially guaranteed Bitcoin and crypto's success. And it's a combination of both, but we're going to talk about specifically the Fed. We'll talk about the government too, but we're going to talk about specifically the Fed this time around. And for the last 10, 15 years, since '08, they've been printing like crazy, keeping interest rates low, and then COVID kind of hit. And that was like a big like thwack in the face. So they had to print even more. Whether it was under Obama, Trump, or Biden, they printed like crazy. And when you print like crazy for that long, inflation is going to come sooner or later, no matter what your economic policies are, because you printed way too much, especially with the stimulus and all that stuff. People had extra money. And what happens when you have inflation? Well, according to Jerome Powell, you have to use every single means possible to kill inflation. That's right. And that a lot of times that actually means making the economy suffer. But it's not only the U.S. economy. Remember, we raised those interest rates like crazy. But if you think we raised them like crazy, consider Russia and the war. They actually, to keep their ruble from completely collapsing, they hiked it by 20%. Not 20 basis points, mind you, 20% overnight to keep the ruble from falling apart. China, despite all its economic bluster, we're number two, we're going to take number one first, they whine like a little bitch about the United States increasing interest rates because it made their Chinese yuan less competitive against the US dollar because people wanted to invest in US dollars. I guess that government mandate of you can only port 50,000 US dollars worth of Chinese into US dollars every year wasn't having the effect they wanted to because everyone wanted to trade in. And from what I hear from my relatives back in China is the government and the banks are making every possible excuse possible, even if you stay within the 50,000 limit, to not let you trade Chinese yuan for a US dollar. So there's no free trade. And pretty much every single one of them say every businessman over there would rather have their reserve in US dollars than Chinese yuan. It's just that the government doesn't let them. So all this hoopla about the US dollar losing prominence or people no longer wanting the US dollar and wanting the Chinese yuan, lies. Because even the businessmen over there, if you didn't have a gun to their head and you offered them Chinese yuan or US dollars, they would pick US dollars 100 times out of 100 times. So let's get that out of the way first. But the thing is the US raising interest rates is actually affecting the rest of the world because it makes US dollars, more profitable to actually hold for the higher interest rates. It's making those other dollars not as valuable. And a lot of countries have actually had runs on the money because they've had to raise their interest rates higher as well to combat the inflation. So the Fed actually, by raising the interest rates on the US dollar, has affected the rest of the world. You've seen Europe, their inflation crisis, and they've actually raised it by even more than the US dollar. When the US and the euro does that, the rest of the world is actually affected too. And you're seeing, places right now like Turkey and many other countries having these big bank runs or having these big financial crises. And they're actually turning to crypto because crypto is outside the governmental control and Bitcoin kind of operates independently of other governments. So you're actually sparking more adoption in these third world countries. I know the IMF is doing its best to scare these countries away from crypto adoption, but it's not really working. You look at El Salvador, not only have they made Bitcoin legal tender and they're buying a bunch of Bitcoin, which right now honestly isn't that popular because they bought at $55,000 and now they're down on their Bitcoin, but I think they'll make a lot of money going forward. Not only has El Salvador made Bitcoin legal tender, they just granted a license to Binance, and so did Japan, and quite a few other places. And I think, Germany and the other places that aren't so friendly with Binance, I think they're going to come to Binance's side much sooner than the United States. Especially the third world countries, they want that Bitcoin and they want other cryptos as well. Because to them, it's a medium of exchange. It's actually a way to do business. Remember, because the US dollar's inflated and they raised the interest rates really high, a lot of those countries' currencies just became completely and utterly unstable, and even more unstable than they usually are. So they can't depend on their government backing of their own currency. What do? They want a kind of like a trustless money that doesn't depend on the government, and that's where they actually get Bitcoin. Obviously, they don't really buy into your theory that the US government and the CIA actually made Bitcoin. They actually want to buy Bitcoin as a hedge against their own currency. Not really against the US dollar, mind you, but against their own currency. They still would like to get the US dollar, but people in those countries don't actually have access to US dollars. And because they don't have access to US dollars, they want the next best thing, which is crypto. Because people, on a day-to-day basis, they have to spend this money. They have to buy things they need for life. It's not like you and me where we have our spendable money and then we have extra money that we actually store into crypto. They actually need this money for everyday life, and crypto is a way for them to preserve their value from day to day. And you're thinking yeah, but crypto is so volatile, it can dump several percent in a day. But that's true, but over the long term, over a couple of months, a year, it generally does go up. And over definitely a 4-year cycle, it goes up. So they're seeing that as a better alternative than say the Zimbabwe dollar or something like that, which can inflate basically to infinity overnight. So for a lot of these hyperinflationary economies, Bitcoin is seen as a way out for the people in those economies, no matter how much the government tries to sway it. And I'm pretty sure the government officials themselves are using this as well, because in some of those countries, people will actually take lunch break off to go buy food for their family for dinner, because if they wait until the end of the day, that price is going to be 50% higher. That's the definition of hyperinflation. This 5% a year, 6-7% a year that we've been experiencing in the United States, that's not hyperinflation. It's bad for us because we're not used to it. We've been having very, very low inflation for the last 20 years leading up to this. Food prices really haven't changed for several years before the last 2 years. But we don't really have hyperinflation, not the kind of hyperinflation that they actually have. The US dollar is still fairly stable. So is the euro and the other big currencies. But by us manipulating our currency and raising the interest rates, it's actually made the smaller countries a lot less stable. It's also restricted, our QTs also restricted their access to the US dollar. So their country's citizens are flocking to something else, and that is cryptocurrency. And I think once you let the cat out of the bag, you can't really put it back in the bag, because many people are already depending on it already, and some of them are actually even finding it to be a better system. Obviously, some of the governments do, because they will actually use it to get around US sanctions, and that's one of the things that the US government really doesn't want to happen. So it is one of the reasons they're seriously cracking down on it. But the other reason is they just need this stuff to get by on a day-to-day basis. They would rather bet on Bitcoin in the 4-year cycle than bet on their own currency. And in many cases, that is a much better bet. See, we actually use cryptos to speculate here for the most part, but they don't actually use cryptos to speculate in their respective countries. They do actually have a use case for it, either for long-term savings, which is legitimate because you can't really depend on your own currency, or for day-to-day use, which is also legitimate. So the growth in third world countries or developing world countries is really, really incredible the last few years. And that's why the Fed has actually guaranteed that crypto is going to be successful, because they've manipulated the system so much, and they've actually caused a lot of runs in other countries. Of course, the Fed doesn't care about that because the Fed's more of a United States thing. But in other countries, the uptick of crypto adoption is directly tied to the Fed's intervention in the US economy, which affects everyone else as well. So, despite all of that, they're actually the main catalyst to actually crypto being successful. Also, the US regulators like the SEC and other regulators have actually run a lot of companies out of the United States, and other countries are welcoming them with open arms. Look at Dubai in the Middle East, and Japan's welcoming Binance as well. So there's a lot of stuff going on in that sector as well. And Jeremy Allaire, the CEO of Circle, actually said today, in addition to this, that most of Circle's adoption, USDC's adoption, is overseas, not in the United States. In fact, a full 70% of Circle's adoption is overseas. That's pretty incredible when you actually think about things, because that means you have a US-based stablecoin, but USDC is global, so you can buy it off any exchange. A US-based stablecoin is 70% being bought outside the United States. If you don't think people want the US dollar, that alone should be a wake-up call to tell you that other countries, whether they're part of BRICS or whatever or not, they want the US dollar. Because they might not be able to get USD directly, but with Binance or other exchanges in their country, they can buy USDC, which is backed by USD or USD cash equivalents or something like that. And those other countries, they're buying USDC to them, the USDC is just like the USD. It's much more dependable than maybe their currency. So they're like buying up USDC all they can. And I expect that's also why Tether is really, really big as well, because some people would rather just have their money in Tether. And Tether's really never gone kaput or anything. They've always been able to redeem people for their money. So people do actually trust an entity like Tether as well. To represent USD. So like these stable coins are growing massively outside the United States. In the United States, we have fiat on-ramps, we have direct USD on-ramps. So it might be easier for us to use USD. But remember, like in other countries, they don't really have that option. They don't have a USD option, but they might be able to buy USDT or USDC with their own fiat money. And boy, they are really doing it. And that just onboards them on to crypto. Also, you can see expansion like Hedera in Southeast Asia. And of course, now Cardano in Africa. And now we have other remittance systems within the smaller countries themselves. So everything is like coming together for crypto in terms of like a worldwide adoption, starting with the smaller countries first and then moving on to other countries and finally coming to the United States, hopefully sooner rather than later. But the Fed's actions, them raising the interest rates so high, and of course, the US government actions like the SEC kicking companies out of the United States has actually almost made certain that crypto will be adopted worldwide and has guaranteed crypto's success across the globe. Let me know what you think, like and subscribe, hit that bell notifications button. Thank you and have a nice day.